The massive doors of the Galactic Council chamber stood open like the mouth of some ancient beast waiting to swallow its prey. Inside the vast hall, hundreds of alien delegates sat in their floating seats, arranged in perfect circles around the central speaking platform. The air hummed with the quiet chatter of a dozen different species, all speaking in their native tongues through universal translators. Ambassador Quillith of the Velkari adjusted her purple robes with 4 of her tentacle arms, while keeping her other 4 busy reviewing data tablets. Her large black eyes scanned the daily reports with practiced efficiency. Today was supposed to be routine. The Council had summoned the newest species called humans to answer some questions about their expansion into contested space regions. Nothing serious, just basic diplomatic procedure. The reptilian Zephyrian delegate Sisrak flicked his forked tongue and tasted the recycled air of the station. His yellow eyes glowed with mild interest as he waited for the proceedings to begin. Humans were young and primitive according to all reports. This would be over quickly. High above them all in the observation dome, Chancellor Vorthak of the ancient ethereal race floated in his energy form. His species had seen the rise and fall of countless civilizations over millions of years. These humans were just another brief flicker in the cosmic timeline. He expected nothing remarkable from today. The great viewing screens around the chamber showed the peaceful emptiness of space surrounding Harmony Station. Stars twinkled like scattered diamonds against the black void. Several small, diplomatic vessels from various species hung motionless near the station like sleeping fish. Everything was calm and normal. Then the proximity alarm started screaming. The first sign of trouble came as a ripple in space itself. The fabric of reality bent and twisted as something massive prepared to drop out of hyperspace. The viewing screens automatically adjusted their sensors to track the incoming signature. What emerged from the swirling vortex of hyperspace was not a single small diplomatic vessel. Instead, an entire fleet materialized in the space around Harmony Station. Dozens of human warships dropped out of their faster-than-light travel with the thunder of displaced spacetime. The lead ship was enormous, a dreadnought-class vessel that dwarfed even the largest Council peacekeeping ships. Its name was painted in bold letters across its scarred hull: Soul's Wrath. Behind it came cruisers and destroyers and support vessels, all bearing the blue and white colors of the Human Earth Defense Force. But it was not their size that made every delegate in the Council chamber fall silent with shock and fear. It was their condition. Every single human ship bore the unmistakable marks of recent battle. Plasma burns scored their hulls in long, blackened streaks. Pieces of debris and twisted metal hung from their weapon arrays like the remnants of some terrible feast. The armor plating on several ships showed holes that had been hastily patched with emergency materials. Most disturbing of all were the dark stains that covered portions of every vessel. Even through the viewing screens, the aliens could see that. The stains were not rust or normal spaceware. They were organic. They were blood. The Soul's Wrath moved with surprising grace for something so damaged. Its engines glowed steady blue as it took position directly in front of the station. The other human ships spread out in perfect formation around it. Despite their battered appearance, they moved with military precision that spoke of iron discipline and endless training. Ambassador Quillith felt her tentacles curl in involuntary fear. Her species had excellent vision, and she could make out details that others might miss. There were pieces of what looked like alien technology fused into the hull of the human flagship. Not their own technology. Something else. Something that had been ripped away in violent combat. Delegate Sisrak tasted fear in the air as his sensitive tongue detected the chemical signatures of stress hormones from dozens of different species all around the chamber. His own hearts were beating faster as he stared at the viewing screens. Those ships had been in a war, a recent war, and they had won. Chancellor Vorthak descended from his observation dome, his energy form crackling with agitation. In all his tons of existence, he had rarely seen warships arrive at a diplomatic meeting still bearing the marks of battle. What had these humans been fighting? And why had they come here directly from combat instead of returning home to repair and rearm? Communication channels crackled to life as the human fleet transmitted their identification codes and requested permission to dock. The voice that came through the speakers was calm and professional. but carried an undertone of exhaustion that spoke of beings pushed to their limits. "This is Admiral Park Day, commanding the human fleet, requesting diplomatic docking privileges for our delegation to address the Galactic Council as summoned." The words were polite and proper, but there was something else in that voice. Something that made even the most arrogant delegates sit up and pay attention. It was the voice of someone who had seen death and dealt death and carried the weight of both on their shoulders. The docking request was approved because protocol demanded it, but every alien in the chamber could feel the tension rising like electricity before a storm. Through the viewing screens, they watched as a smaller transport ship detached from the Soul's Wrath and moved toward the station docking bay. The transport ship was in the same condition as the rest of the fleet. Its hull showed scorch marks and impact damage. Strange fluids had dried across its surface in patterns that suggested they had been sprayed there during combat. As it approached the docking bay, the exterior lights revealed something that made several delegates gasp in shock. There were handprints on the hull, bloody handprints pressed against the metal as if someone had been trying to hold on while the ship maneuvered through battle. The prints were human-sized, but there were others too. Larger prints from unknown species mixed with the human marks in a pattern that told a story of desperate struggle and shared suffering. The transport ship sealed itself to the docking bay with a solid thunk that echoed through the station structure. For several minutes, nothing happened. The chamber waited in tense silence as everyone wondered what kind of beings would emerge from that blood-stained vessel. When the airlock finally cycled open, the first figure to step onto Harmony Station was a human male of medium height wearing the dark blue uniform of their military. His black hair was cut short in military fashion but was disheveled as if he had been running his hands through it. His face bore fresh cuts and bruises that had not yet healed. This was Captain Lee Hyun, and he carried himself like a man who had been through hell and somehow found his way back out. His uniform jacket was torn at the shoulder and hastily repaired with field patches. Dark stains covered his sleeves and the front of his shirt. When he walked, his boots left faint red marks on the pristine white floor of the docking bay. Behind him came more humans, all bearing similar signs of recent combat. Their faces were drawn with exhaustion, but their eyes burned with something that made the watching aliens step back instinctively. It was not anger or aggression. It was something far more dangerous. It was determination. The human delegation made their way through the station corridors toward the council chamber. Every step echoed with the weight of whatever they had just endured. The scent of battle clung to them like an invisible cloud. Smoke and blood and the metallic tang of weapons fire recently discharged. As they approached the great doors of the council chamber, Captain Lee Hyun paused for a moment. He looked down at his hands and seemed surprised to see that they were still stained with blood. Not his own blood, someone else's blood. He made no attempt to clean them. The doors opened and the human delegation entered the chamber where hundreds of alien eyes turned to stare at them. The silence was complete and absolute. Every delegate could see the evidence of battle written across these humans like a story told in scars and stains. Captain Lee Hyun walked toward the central speaking platform, his footsteps the only sound in the vast chamber. The blood on his hands had not yet dried completely. Behind him, his fellow humans took their positions with military precision despite their obvious exhaustion. The galaxy was about to learn what humanity looked like when they came straight from war. What they looked like when they had fought something terrible and won at great cost. What they looked like when they carried the weight of both victory and loss on their shoulders, like a burden they would never set down. And in that moment, every alien delegate in the chamber realized that everything they thought they knew about humans was about to change forever. Captain Lee Hyun stood at the central speaking platform and looked out at the sea of alien faces staring back at him. Some showed fear. Others showed disgust at his blood-stained appearance. A few showed curiosity about what had happened to bring humans here in such condition. He could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on him like a physical force. The silence stretched for long moments as Lee gathered his thoughts. His throat was dry from shouting orders during the battle, just hours before. His hand still trembled slightly from the adrenaline that had kept him functioning through the worst of the fighting. But his voice when he finally spoke was steady and clear. "We did not come here to threaten anyone," he began. His words echoed in the vast chamber through the universal translation system. We came here because we had no choice. We came here straight from hell itself, and we brought with us the proof of what we found there." Ambassador Quyleth shifted nervously in her floating seat. Her tentacles writhed with agitation as she processed the human captain's words. This was not how diplomatic meetings were supposed to begin. There should have been formal greetings and protocol exchanges and careful diplomatic language. Instead, this bloodied human was speaking of hell and proof as if he were delivering a military report. "We know why you summoned us," Lee continued. "You believe we have been too aggressive in our expansion into contested space. You think we are conquering worlds and building an empire like so many species before us. You are wrong. We have been searching." The viewing screens around the chamber flickered to life as Lee activated a data transmission from his ship. The first image that appeared was a star chart showing the outer rim territories where human ships had been active. Red dots marked locations where human vessels had been detected by other species monitoring systems. 3 months ago, the Andromedan colony fleet disappeared, Lee explained as he gestured toward the display. 12 ships carrying 50,000 of the most peaceful beings in the galaxy, artists and poets and philosophers who had never raised a weapon in anger. They were traveling to establish a new cultural center in the Kepler sector. Several delegates nodded in recognition. The Andromedans were well known throughout the galaxy as master artists whose works were treasured by dozens of species. They were also known for their complete pacifism and their empathic abilities that allowed them to feel the emotions of others. The idea of Andromedans being involved in any kind of violence was almost impossible to imagine. "When they vanished, you declared them lost to space," Lee said, and his voice carried a note of accusation that made several delegates shift uncomfortably. "Navigation error, you said. Pirate attack, you suggested. Equipment failure, you concluded. Case closed. File archived. 50,000 lives written off as acceptable losses in the vast galaxy." Chancellor Vorthak descended lower in his energy form, as he sensed the growing tension in the chamber. His ancient species had learned long ago that sometimes the youngest races could surprise even the oldest with their actions. Something about this human's manner suggested that surprises were coming, but we kept looking. Lee continued. Human cryptographers worked around the clock to analyze the last transmissions from the Andromedan fleet. While you held meetings and formed committees, our people decoded fragments of distress signals that everyone else dismissed as background noise. The viewing screen changed to show waveform patterns and signal analysis data. Most of the delegates could not read human technical displays, but the patterns were clear enough. These were distress calls, desperate pleas for help that had been scattered across space like electronic screams. It took us 2 months to trace the signal patterns back to their source, Lee said. 2 months of following ghost signals and tracking ion trails through regions of space that most species avoid. 2 months of sailing deeper and deeper into the darkness while everyone else had given up hope. The star chart zoomed in to show the Void Nebula, a region of space known for its dangerous radiation and gravitational anomalies. Most civilized species avoided the area entirely, due to the hazards it presented to both ships and crew. It was considered a dead zone where nothing of value could possibly exist. We found them in the heart of the Void Nebula, Lee announced, and the chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. The Andromedans were not lost to space. They were not victims of equipment failure or navigation errors. They had been captured. They had been taken by the Thrakari Crimson Fleet and turned into entertainment. The name Thrakari sent a chill through every delegate in the chamber. The Thrakari were known throughout the galaxy as brutal warriors who lived for combat and conquest. But even among their own kind, the Crimson Fleet was considered extreme. They were outcasts who had been banished from Thrakari space for their excessive cruelty and disregard for any form of honor. Lieutenant Kim Soo-jin stepped forward from the human delegation to take her place beside Lee at the speaking platform. Her uniform was in even worse condition than her captain's, with torn fabric and bloodstains covering her arms and chest. Her face bore the haunted expression of someone who had seen things that would give her nightmares for years to come. She activated her own data tablet and new images appeared on the viewing screens. These were not star charts or technical displays. These were recordings. Video footage taken during the human rescue operation that showed the inside of a Thrakari battle station hidden deep within the Void Nebula. What the delegates saw made several of them gasp in horror and others turn away entirely. The footage showed a massive arena surrounded by cheering Thrakari warriors. In the center of the arena, Andromedan civilians were being forced to fight each other with crude weapons while their captors placed bets on the outcomes. The empathic Andromedans who could feel each other's pain and fear were being tortured in the cruelest way possible. Every blow they were forced to deliver to save their own lives was felt by their victims as if it were happening to themselves. The psychological torture was beyond anything most species could imagine. The Crimson Fleet had been using them as gladiators for months, Sujin reported in a voice that shook with barely controlled rage. Poets and artists and teachers forced to fight for the entertainment of monsters. Children watching their parents die in the arena. Parents forced to raise weapons against their own offspring to satisfy Thrakari bloodlust. The viewing screens showed more footage from the rescue operation. Human Marines in full combat armor fighting their way through the Thrakari station corridors. The sound of weapons fire and explosions echoed through the council chamber as delegates watched the humans battle their way deeper into the facility. But what struck many observers was not the violence of the combat, but the care the humans showed for the rescued prisoners. The footage showed human soldiers cradling wounded Andromedans and carrying them to safety, even while under heavy fire. Medical personnel working frantically to save lives while explosions shook the corridors around them. "We lost 300, and 12 of our own people getting them out," Lee said quietly. 2 destroyers and countless smaller craft destroyed or damaged beyond repair. The Soul's Wrath herself nearly broke apart when we rammed through the station's shields to reach the prisoners faster. The chamber was completely silent now, as the full weight of what the humans had done began to sink in. They had sailed into one of the most dangerous regions of space to rescue people they had never met. They had fought a battle against overwhelming odds not for conquest or glory, but to save innocent lives that everyone else had written off as lost. Admiral Park Days. Voice crackled through the communication system from the flagship orbiting above. His words were transmitted to the entire chamber, so that every delegate could hear the exhaustion and determination in his tone. "We brought back 47,000 survivors," he reported. 3,000 died in the arena before we could reach them. Every single one of the rescued Andromedans bears the physical and psychological scars of what was done to them. Some may never recover from the trauma. The viewing screens showed the human hospital ships that had accompanied the fleet. Through the transparent sections, medical personnel could be seen working frantically to treat the rescued prisoners. Andromedan civilians lay in medical beds hooked to life support systems, while human doctors and nurses worked to save their lives. But the most powerful moment came when the screens showed a young Andromedan child reaching out to touch the hand of a human medic. The child's empathic abilities allowed them to sense the genuine care and compassion in the human's heart. After months of torture and pain, this was the first positive emotion they had felt from another being. "This is why our ships bear the stains of battle," Lee concluded, as he looked around the chamber at every delegate in turn. "This is why we came, here without stopping to clean the blood from our hulls or repair the damage to our vessels. Because while you debate and form committees and write reports, innocent people are suffering and dying in the darkness." The truth hung in the air like a physical presence that every alien could feel pressing against their conscience. The humans had not come as conquerors or aggressors. They had come as rescuers, still carrying the wounded and the traumatized from a battle fought not for territory or resources, but for the simple principle that innocent life had value. And in that moment, every delegate in the G, Engineer Cho Min-ho stepped forward from the human delegation, his hands visibly shaking as he approached the speaking platform. His engineering uniform was torn and stained with substances that made several alien delegates recoil in disgust. Burns covered his arms where acidic alien blood had splashed during the rescue operation. His eyes held the haunted look of someone who had seen the absolute worst that intelligent beings could do to each other. The viewing screens flickered to life again as Cho activated his personal recording device. What appeared on the displays made even the most hardened warrior species in the chamber gasp in horror. The footage showed the interior of the Thrakari gladiatorial complex in detail that no being should ever have to witness. was part of the engineering team that cut through the station's hull. Cho began, his voice barely steady enough to be understood. We had to bypass 17 different security systems and cut through armor plating that was 3 meters thick. But what we found inside was worse than any of us had imagined possible. The recordings showed corridors lined with cells, barely large enough for a single being to lie down. Inside each cell, Andromedan prisoners huddled in corners trying to comfort each other despite their own terror and pain. Many bore visible injuries from previous fights in the arena. Others showed signs of malnutrition and abuse that spoke of months of systematic torture. The Thrakari had designed the entire facility around maximizing suffering. Cho continued as new images appeared on screen. Every cell was positioned so that prisoners could see and hear what happened to others. The empathic Andromedans were forced to experience not just their own pain, but the agony of everyone around them. Lieutenant Kim Soo-jin rejoined Cho at the platform and activated additional footage from her personal combat recorder. The new images showed the rescue team's first entry into the cell blocks. Human Marines moved carefully through the corridors, their weapons ready but their movements slow and non-threatening as they approached the terrified prisoners. Many of the Andromedans tried to hide when they first saw us. Soo-jin explained. They had been conditioned to expect pain from any new contact. Some had been tortured for so long that they could barely remember what kindness felt like. Our empaths had to project calm and safety for several minutes before they would even look at us. The footage showed human soldiers kneeling beside Andromedan prisoners and offering them water and medical supplies. The contrast was striking. These same humans who had just fought their way through dozens of Thrakari warriors were now moving with infinite gentleness as they cared for the wounded and traumatized civilians. Medic Jang Hye-won took her turn at the platform, her medical uniform so stained with blood that its original color was barely visible. Her hands were steady now, but the recordings showed them shaking as she worked frantically to save lives during the rescue operation. The medical bay they had set up was not designed for healing. Hye-won reported with clinical precision that barely concealed her rage. It was designed to keep prisoners alive just long enough to be useful in the arena. Crude surgical procedures done without anesthesia, wounds sealed with burning metal to prevent death from blood loss. Broken bones set incorrectly so that fighters would be weakened but still able to perform. The viewing screens showed the human medical teams working in the captured Thrakari facility. Doctors and nurses moved between makeshift medical stations, treating injuries that ranged from recent combat wounds to infections that had been festering for months. The most disturbing cases were the psychological trauma patients who flinched away from any touch and screamed when approached by anyone larger than themselves. What made it worse was the arena itself, Cho said, as he activated recordings from the gladiatorial combat area. The Thrakari had constructed a massive circular pit surrounded by tiered seating that could hold thousands of spectators. The floor was stained with blood and littered with crude weapons designed to cause maximum pain while prolonging combat. The recordings showed the arena during an active fight that had been interrupted by the human assault. 2 Andromedan civilians barely able to stand were being forced to attack each other with spiked clubs, while Thrakari warriors cheered and placed bets. The empathic connection between the Andromedans meant that every blow one delivered was felt. By both combatants, they had been forcing parents to fight their own children. Soo-jin added, her voice breaking slightly. Spouses against spouses, teachers against their former students. The psychological torture was designed to break their spirits completely while providing entertainment for their captors. Medical Officer Park Sang-woo joined the group at the platform, his surgical scrub still damp with alien blood from the emergency procedures he had performed during the rescue. His report focused on the physical evidence of systematic abuse that the medical teams had documented. We found evidence of at least 47 different torture techniques being used on the prisoners, he stated, with the detached tone of someone delivering a clinical report. Chemical burns designed to cause pain without permanent disfigurement. Sonic torture that used the Andromedan's sensitive hearing against them. Psychological conditioning that broke down their natural empathic barriers. The viewing screen showed medical scans and documentation that revealed the full extent of the abuse. X-rays showing bones that had been deliberately broken and allowed to heal improperly. Brain scans revealing damage from sonic torture devices. chemical analysis showing traces of substances designed to enhance pain sensitivity while preventing unconsciousness. But the worst discovery came in the station's databanks, Captain Lee announced as he returned to the platform. Computer records. That showed this was not an isolated incident. The Crimson Fleet had been operating torture facilities like this one for over a decade. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs as Lee activated displays showing shipping manifests and prisoner records. The data revealed a network of similar facilities scattered throughout uncharted space. Species after species that had been reported as missing or lost were actually being held in these hidden torture chambers. 12 different species had vanished. Over the past 10 years, Lee continued. The peaceful Luminar traders who disappeared near the Vega system, the Christine researchers who never returned from their expedition to the Outer Rim, the Harmony singers whose colony ship went missing between star systems, all of them taken by various Thrakari fleets for entertainment purposes. Engineer Cho activated additional displays showing the technical specifications of the torture facilities, the level of planning and engineering that had gone into maximizing. Suffering was beyond what most civilized species could comprehend. Every detail had been designed to cause pain, while keeping prisoners alive and functional enough to provide ongoing entertainment. They had been perfecting their techniques for decades, Cho reported. Each facility was more sophisticated than the last. Better ways to cause pain, more effective methods of psychological torture, improved life support systems to keep prisoners alive longer while being tortured. The recording showed human demolition teams planting charges throughout the Thrakari facility, but even as they prepared to destroy the station, the rescue teams continued working to save every possible life. Medical personnel carried stretchers through corridors that were already filling with smoke from the battle damage. We had less than 30 minutes to evacuate everyone before the station's reactor went critical, Haiwan explained. Our people made 17 trips through collapsing corridors to carry out prisoners who were too weak to walk. Some of our Marines stayed behind to manually operate failing life support systems until the last transport was loaded. The final footage showed the Thrakari station exploding in a brilliant flash of light as the human fleet withdrew with their rescued cargo. But the cameras also captured something else. Human ships moving slowly and carefully despite the danger of debris, because they were carrying thousands of traumatized survivors who needed gentle handling. Intelligence Officer Nam Bo-Ra took the platform to present the most disturbing evidence of all. The Thrakari records had contained detailed information about their customers, other species that had paid to watch the gladiatorial combats, civilized races that had purchased recordings of the torture sessions for their own entertainment. The market for this horror was not limited to the Thrakari. Nam reported. We found payment records from 17 different species, including some that are represented in this very chamber. The torture of innocents had become an entertainment industry with customers throughout the galaxy. The silence that followed this revelation was absolute. Every delegate in the chamber was forced to confront the possibility that members of their own species might have been involved in the systematic torture of peaceful beings. The humans had not just rescued prisoners, they had exposed a network of evil that reached into civilized space itself. Captain Lee looked around the chamber at every alien face staring back at him. Some showed shame. Others showed horror at what they had learned. A few showed anger at being confronted with truths they would rather have ignored. This is what we found in the darkness, he concluded. This is what we fought to stop. While you debated trade agreements and border disputes, innocent beings were screaming for help in hidden chambers throughout the galaxy. Admiral Park Day materialized as a hologram in the center of the council chamber, his image transmitted directly from the bridge of the Soul's Wrath. Even through the flickering blue light of the projection, every delegate could see the exhaustion etched into his weathered face. His uniform bore the same stains and damage as his crew, but his bearing remained straight and proud, despite the obvious cost of their recent battle. The human fleet lost much in the assault on the Thrakari station. The admiral began, his voice carrying across the chamber with the weight of command authority. But we knew the price going in, and we paid it willingly because some things are worth bleeding for. The viewing screens activated to show damage reports and casualty lists from the rescue operation. The numbers were staggering. 2 destroyers, completely lost with all hands. The cruiser Busan's Pride so badly damaged, it had to be scuttled after the crew was evacuated. Dozens of smaller vessels destroyed or damaged beyond repair. The human fleet had been devastated in their mission of mercy. We could have done this the easy way, Admiral Park continued. We could have simply destroyed the Thrakari station from orbit with nuclear weapons. Clean and simple, no human casualties. No risk to our ships or our people. But that would have killed every Andromedan prisoner along with their captors. The display showed tactical simulations of orbital bombardment scenarios that the human command staff had considered and rejected. Each simulation showed the complete destruction of the station and everything inside it. The humans had possessed the firepower to end the threat with no risk to themselves, but had chosen the harder path instead. Captain Lee stepped forward to add his perspective from the ground assault. His uniform was still torn and blood-stained from the close-quarters combat that had raged through the station corridors. Fresh bandages covered wounds on his arms and neck where Thrakari claws had found their mark during the fighting. The Thrakari used the prisoners as human shields, Lee reported. Every corridor we advanced through had Andromedan civilians caught in the crossfire. Every room we entered contained both enemies and innocents mixed together. We could not use heavy weapons or explosives without risking the lives of those we came to save. The viewing screens showed helmet camera footage from the human Marines as they fought their way through the station. The combat was brutal and personal, with humans engaging Thrakari warriors at point-blank range to avoid hitting civilian prisoners. Many of the Marines had discarded their ranged weapons entirely and fought with knives and bare hands to maintain precision. Sergeant Kim Tae-young joined the testimony, his combat armor so damaged that pieces of it had been removed entirely. Burns covered his arms where Thrakari plasma weapons had found gaps in his protection. His report focused on the close-quarters battle that had claimed so many human lives. The Thrakari are born warriors. Tae-young stated with professional respect for a dangerous enemy. They are stronger than humans and faster in close combat. Their natural weapons can cut through our armor like paper. In a fair fight, they would have slaughtered us to the last soldier. But it had not been a fair fight. The humans had used tactics and technology to overcome their physical disadvantages. They had used their intelligence and teamwork to defeat opponents who were individually superior warriors. Most importantly, they had used their willingness to sacrifice themselves for others as a weapon that the Thrakari could not understand or counter. The footage showed human soldiers throwing themselves between Thrakari weapons and Andromedan prisoners, Marines using their own bodies as shields while calling out target information to their teammates. Combat medics working under fire to treat both human casualties and rescued civilians without regard for their own safety. Flight Commander Yoon Tae-kyung appeared on screen from the pilot ready room of the Soul's Wrath. His flight suit was scorched and torn from emergency bailouts and crash landings during the space battle around the station. His report covered the fighter pilot actions that had been necessary to penetrate the Thrakari defensive grid. We lost 18 fighters getting through their outer defenses, Tae-kyung reported with the clipped precision of a combat veteran. The Thrakari had military-grade weapons and shields that were designed to stop full-scale fleet attacks. Our fighters had to fly through overlapping kill zones, while loaded down with rescue equipment instead of heavy weapons. The space battle. Footage showed human fighters weaving through clouds of defensive fire, while carrying rescue pods and medical supplies instead of bombs and missiles. The pilots had sacrificed their combat effectiveness to maximize their rescue capability. Many had died in ships loaded with medical equipment rather than weapons, but the most difficult part of the mission had been the evacuation itself. Dr. Song Ji-hoon reported from the human medical bay, where he had performed surgery on both humans and Andromedans throughout the battle. His surgical scrubs were stained with the blood of multiple species, and his hands shook slightly from exhaustion and stimulants. We had to triage patients while under fire, Song explained. Human Marines with critical injuries were told to wait, while we treated Andromedan civilians who were in worse condition. Some of our people died because we chose to save the prisoners first. They understood and they supported that decision even as they bled out on the deck. The medical footage showed human doctors working frantically in corridors that were shaking from weapons impacts. Nurses carried supplies through smoke-filled passages while explosions echoed around them. The human medical teams had maintained their focus on saving lives, even while their own ship was being torn apart by enemy fire. Engineering Chief Nam Dong-wook transmitted his report from the damage control center of the Soul's Wrath. His engineering uniform was burned and torn from crawling through damaged conduits to make emergency repairs during combat. His face was blackened with smoke and his voice was hoarse from shouting orders over the noise of battle. "We kept the ship together through pure determination," Nam reported. "The Thrakari hit us with everything they had. Hull breaches on 17 decks. Main power offline for 43 minutes, life support failing in 6 sections. But we kept flying because giving up meant letting the prisoners die." The damage report showed just how close the human flagship had come to complete destruction. Multiple hull breaches had been sealed by engineering teams working in vacuum suits. Power systems had been jury-rigged with spare parts and emergency cables. The ship had been held together by the skill and courage of crew members who refused to let their vessel fail, while lives depended on it. Communications Officer Lee Min-jung added her testimony about the coordination required to manage the rescue operation while under attack. Her communications station had been damaged early in the battle, but she had continued working from backup systems throughout the engagement. "We maintained contact with every rescue team throughout the operation," Min-jung reported. 17 different groups working in different sections of the station, all coordinating their movements while fighting for their lives. "We could not afford to lose anyone to friendly fire or miscommunication." The communication log showed the desperate efficiency of the human rescue teams. Updates on prisoner locations mixed with casualty reports and ammunition status. Calls for medical assistance competing with tactical updates and damage assessments. Through it all, the human coordination had remained flawless despite the chaos of combat. But perhaps the most telling testimony came from the rescued prisoners themselves. The viewing screen showed Andromedan civilians being treated in human medical bays. Despite their trauma and injuries, many of them reached out to touch their human rescuers with expressions of gratitude that transcended species barriers. The empathic Andromedans could sense the genuine compassion in their rescuers, Admiral Park explained. They could feel the pain that humans experienced when forced to make life and death decisions. They understood that every human death was mourned by the entire crew and that their rescue had been purchased with blood willingly given. The final piece of testimony came from the ship's chaplain, Commander Park Soo-jin, who had ministered to both the living and the dying throughout the battle. Her dress uniform had been replaced with combat fatigues that were stained with blood and tears from the memorial services she had conducted during the fighting. "We held 17 funeral services during the battle itself," Soo-jin reported. "Human crew members who died knowing that their sacrifice was saving innocent lives. Their last words were not for themselves but for the prisoners we came to rescue. They died as heroes even though they will never be remembered as such by the galaxy at large." The chamber fell silent as the full weight of humanity's sacrifice became clear. They had not stumbled into heroism by accident or achieved victory through superior technology. They had deliberately chosen the path that would save the most innocent lives, even knowing it would cost them dearly in blood and ships and friends. Admiral Park's hologram flickered as he prepared to conclude his testimony. His image was distorted by interference from the battle damage to his ship's communication systems, but his words came through clearly. "This is what mercy costs," he said simply. "This is the price of choosing to save lives instead of taking them. We paid it gladly because the alternative was to let innocent beings suffer." Why? Amber opened with a soft hiss and every head turned to see who was entering. What appeared in the doorway made the entire assembly fall into stunned silence. A group of Andromedan survivors walked slowly into the chamber, supported by human medical staff and moving with the careful steps of beings still recovering from terrible trauma. The lead figure was an elderly Andromedan female, whose flowing robes had been replaced with simple medical garments. Her natural luminescence was dim from months of suffering, but her large eyes held a strength that had somehow survived the torture chambers. This was Zenthara, the poet-philosopher who had been the spiritual leader of the missing colony fleet. "Captain." Lee quickly moved to offer his arm for support as Zenthara approached the central platform. The contrast between the battle-scarred human soldier and the fragile rescued civilian spoke volumes about what had transpired in the darkness of the Void Nebula. Here was the reason for all the blood and sacrifice standing together in the heart of galactic civilization. Honored delegate Zenthara began, her voice still hoarse from screaming in the gladiatorial arena, but carrying the musical quality that made Andromedan's speech so prized throughout the galaxy. I stand before you not as an accuser, but as a witness to something I never expected to see in my lifetime. Her words were translated through the chamber's systems, but many delegates found themselves leaning forward to catch every nuance of her testimony. The Andromedans were known for their inability to speak falsehoods due to their empathic nature. Whatever she said would be the absolute truth as she experienced it. For 3 months, my people lived in darkness, Zenthara continued. We were forced to fight each other for the entertainment of monsters while the galaxy that claimed to protect peaceful species looked the other way. We called for help, but our voices were dismissed as static. We begged for rescue but were written off as acceptable losses. Around the chamber, alien delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Many of them had personally signed off on the reports that declared the Andromedan colony fleet lost to space. It had been easier to file the paperwork than to organize search and rescue operations in dangerous regions. But these humans heard our cries when no one else would listen, Zenthara said as she turned to look at Captain Lee with an expression of profound gratitude. They sailed into hell itself to bring us home. They bled for us. They died for us. They chose to save strangers rather than protect their own safety. The viewing screens activated one final time to show footage from the rescue ships. Andromedan survivors were being treated in human medical bays with a level of care and compassion that spoke of genuine concern for their well-being. Human doctors worked around the clock to heal both physical wounds and psychological trauma, while never asking for payment or recognition. We could feel their emotions through our empathic abilities, Zenthara explained. Every human who died in the rescue felt joy at the moment of death because they knew their sacrifice was saving innocent lives. Every soldier who was wounded felt pride that their pain had meaning. Every crew member who survived felt genuine sorrow for those we lost in the arena before they could reach us. The impact of her words hit the chamber like a physical force. The Andromedans could literally sense the true motivations of other beings through their empathic gifts. Their testimony about human compassion was not opinion or propaganda, but direct observation of the human heart during moments of ultimate crisis. Ambassador Quillith of the Velkari rose from her floating seat, all 4 of her arms trembling with emotion that her species rarely displayed in public. Her large black eyes were fixed on the human delegation as she struggled to find words adequate to express what she was feeling. On behalf of the Velkari Confederacy, I formally apologize to the human delegation, Quillith announced, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. We labeled you as aggressive expansionists when you were actually searching for the lost. We questioned your motives when we should have been questioning our own indifference to suffering. The reptilian delegate Sisrak uncoiled his massive form and stood to his full impressive height. His yellow eyes glowed with something that might have been shame as he looked at the rescued Andromedans and their human protectors. The Zephyrian Empire offers our fleet to assist in hunting down the remaining Thrakari torture operations, Sisrak declared with the hissing accent of his species. We have been warriors for 1,000 generations, but we have forgotten what it means to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. Perhaps it is time we remembered. One by one, the other delegates began to stand and offer their own apologies and assistance. The crystalline luminari chimed their support in harmonious tones. The aquatic depths dwellers gurgled their agreement through translation devices. Even the normally isolationist cloudwalkers offered to share their advanced sensor technology to help locate hidden facilities. But the most shocking moment came when the chamber's main doors opened again and a new figure entered. Ambassador Queltar of the legitimate Thrakari government strode into the chamber wearing the ritual armor of his warrior caste but carrying no weapons as a sign of peaceful intent. The Thrakari delegate was massive even by the standards of his warrior race. His reptilian features were scarred from countless battles and his eyes held the cold intelligence of a born predator. But as he looked at the rescued Andromedans, something like shame flickered across his alien features. The Thrakari High Command formally disavows the actions of the Crimson Fleet, Queltar announced in the growling tones of his species. They are outcasts and criminals who have dishonored everything our warrior culture stands for. We request human assistance in hunting them down, because our own forces lack the determination to pursue enemies into regions as dangerous as the Void Nebula. The admission sent shockwaves through the chamber. The proud Thrakari were requesting help from the young human species because they recognized that humans possessed something their own warrior culture lacked: the willingness to sacrifice everything for beings they had never met simply because it was the right thing to do. Chancellor Vorthak descended from his observation dome, his ancient energy form crackling with emotions that his species had not felt for millions of years. His voice resonated through the chamber with the weight of eons when he finally spoke. In all my existence, spanning countless civilizations, I have never witnessed what I have seen today. Vorthak intoned with the gravity of ultimate authority, a species that measures its success not by worlds conquered but by lives saved. A people who choose the hardest path because it leads to the greatest good. The Ethereal Council formally recognizes humanity as guardians of galactic civilization. The word declaration was unprecedented. The ancient Ethereals had never granted such recognition to any species in recorded history. But then no species had ever done what humanity had just accomplished. The session continued for hours as delegate after delegate stood to pledge support for new initiatives. The Andromedan protocols were established requiring immediate action when any species went missing rather than bureaucratic delays. The Galactic Rescue Force was created with humanity at its head, despite being the youngest member of the Council. Resource commitments poured in from every member species: ships and crews and funding for search and rescue operations, advanced sensor technology to locate hidden facilities, combat support to assault torture operations wherever they might be found. The galaxy had finally awakened to the reality of suffering in the darkness. As the formal session concluded, Captain Lee found himself standing beside Zenthara watching the controlled chaos of delegates organizing rescue operations. The Andromedan poet placed a gentle hand on his arm and smiled with the first genuine happiness she had felt in months. "You have changed everything," she said softly. "Not just for my people, but for the entire galaxy. You have shown us what we could be if we chose compassion over convenience." Lee looked out through the great viewing windows at the human fleet still holding formation in space around the station. The Soul's Wrath and her sister ships bore fresh scars from their recent battle, but they were already preparing for the next mission. Somewhere in the darkness, other innocents were suffering, and now they would not suffer alone. The blood on those ships had been washed away by the station's cleaning crews, but the memory of what it represented would endure forever. It was the mark of a species that had looked into the abyss and chosen to light a candle rather than curse the darkness. Admiral Park's voice crackled through the communication system as the human fleet prepared to depart. Multiple alien vessels were joining the formation as the first joint rescue mission prepared to launch. Intelligence reports had located 3 more suspected torture facilities, and the new Galactic Rescue Force was ready to respond. As the combined fleet jumped to hyperspace, the delegates in the council chamber watched through the viewing screens until the last ship disappeared into the swirling vortex of faster-than-light travel. They were not heading home to rest and refit. They were heading toward the next cry for help, the next impossible rescue, the next chance to prove that in a cold and vast universe, someone still cared enough to bleed for strangers. The galaxy would never be the same. Humanity had shown them what Gua